that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, it is midday and you are with GB News Live with Pip Thompson and Tom Harwood. Coming up this lunchtime.
Labour has accused the Home Secretary of, quote, encouraging extremists on all sides and attacking the police when she should be backing them. That's coming after Suella Braverman accused the Met Police of double standards to its policing of protests.
However, Labour themselves are not out of the spotlight as Sir Keir Starmer is facing an ever more difficult battle to keep his party united after several of his own MPs tried to force a Commons vote on a ceasefire in Gaza.
And we'll also have the latest from Israel as they claim that they have taken over a Hamas stronghold in northern Gaza after a 10-hour battle. An Israeli spokesperson will update us shortly.
And if you're a mum or even a dad, would you pay over £200 for a baby perfume? Yeah, fashion brand Dior have launched a fragrance for our little ones. 230 quid to be precise. That's pricey, isn't it? Let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.com. First, let's get all your news headlines with Tatiana.
Pip, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Downing Street said the content published in Suella Braverman's comment article in The Times was not agreed with them. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey is calling for the Prime Minister to sack Mrs Braverman over her claims. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has accused Ms Braverman of encouraging extremists.
She is deliberately inflaming community tensions in the most dangerous of ways. She is encouraging extremists on all sides, attacking the police when she should be backing them. It is highly irresponsible and dangerous, and no other Home Secretary would ever have done this.
IDF soldiers uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches when they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Some 80 countries and international organisations will meet in Paris today to discuss ways of getting humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict. The Foreign Secretary is in Saudi Arabia as part of a diplomatic effort to continue to prevent the Middle East crisis spiralling into wider war. He's holding high-level talks with regional counterparts in efforts to avoid escalation and work towards a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. The Supreme Court is set to give its decision on whether a government plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda is lawful. The Court of Appeal ruled in June the plan to deport those seeking asylum to the East African nation was unlawful. The Home Office challenged that ruling last month. The decision on the challenge is expected to be made on Wednesday. The NHS waiting list in England has hit a record high, with more people facing delays of more than a year and a half. NHS England found the waitlist increased to just over 7.5 million at the end of September. Officials say it's made up of 6.5 million patients, with some waiting for more than one treatment. The overall list is now nearly 3.5 million higher than it was before the COVID pandemic. Dame Priti Patel will give evidence at the COVID inquiry today. The former Home Secretary is likely to face questions about her approach to controlling the border and policing of lockdown rules. Dame Priti lobbied for stricter border controls in the early stages of the pandemic in an attempt to prevent the virus reaching the UK. She was overruled. An independent inquiry into a Channel crossing tragedy where at least 27 people died has been launched. The incident happened after an inflatable migrant boat capsized in November 2021. An investigation will now take place into the circumstances of the deaths, which included a pregnant woman and 3 children. It follows the publication of a report by the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, which found the boat was wholly unsuitable and ill-equipped. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder over the fatal stabbing of 15-year-old Alfie Lewis. Alfie was attacked in the Horsforth area of Leeds on Tuesday afternoon as children were leaving 2 nearby schools. The 14-year-old will appear in court, also charged with possession of a knife. Alfie's family say he was 1 in a million and had the biggest heart. New rules have been unveiled for children's safety online, including limiting direct messages to protect them from groomers. It's part of Ofcom's Codes of Practice under the Online Safety Act, which was signed into law a week ago. The largest platforms will be required to put measures in place, including blocking children from being a suggested friend and blocking people outside their agreed connections from direct messaging. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Pip and Tom.
A very good afternoon and welcome to GB News Live.
Labour has accused Home Secretary Suella Braverman of encouraging extremists on all sides and attacking the police when she should be backing them.
The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, was granted an urgent question in the Commons on the operational independence of the Metropolitan Police.
Policing Minister Chris Philps said the pro-Palestinian protests, attended by tens of thousands of protesters in recent weeks, have largely passed without significant incident.
And she is deliberately inflaming community tensions. Remembrance events are really important to all of us. Those events need to be protected. That is the job of the police, to enforce, to respect the law, maintaining public safety, tackling hate crime and extremism, and respecting rights in law to peaceful protest. And they have to follow the law and the evidence, whatever politicians think, not be the operational arm of the Home Secretary.
I don't think it's acceptable that our fellow citizens feel scared, or uneasy walking about the streets of London. And it is reasonable for politicians, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and others, I'm sure some on the other side of the House as well, to raise those concerns and make sure that the police are protecting those communities. Members of our own community are feeling scared this weekend. Let's keep that at the front of our mind, not party political point scoring.
Well, this all comes ahead of pro-Palestinian groups planning to march on Armistice Day and appeared to be set to go ahead despite government objections.
Let's discuss this further now with GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Hello to you, Nigel. Good afternoon. What do you think Suella Braverman's game plan here is? Is she on a mission to get herself sacked?
Well, I think she's on a mission to become the next leader of the Tory party, and that's the reason for doing what she's doing. The question about whether or not she should be sacked is obviously down to Rishi Sunak, and that causes a problem. When Rishi Sunak loses the next election, he will obviously have to quit. Suella Braverman was almost sure to run for the leadership after that. The danger of sacking her, of course, is that she might mount a challenge before the next election. So for Rishi Sunak, it's a very decision what he does about her.
Nigel, it is interesting. We've been hearing this morning from allies of the Home Secretary that the contentious article that appeared in the Times that she wrote was sent to Number 10, was sent back. But in the last few minutes, we've had word from the official spokesperson of the Prime Minister that, quote, the article was not cleared with Number 10. That's coming from the Prime Minister's official spokesperson in the last few minutes. And we're hearing that there'll be a further update from Number 10 later on today. This is an enormous rift now between the Prime Minister and his Home Secretary.
Yes, what it seems to have happened is that the article was sent to Number 10 for approval. Number 10 came back with a number of amendments to it, quite rightly so. I mean, some of them is absolutely appalling, especially when you talk about a comparison with Northern Ireland. It seems like that Suella Braverman decided not to make those amendments. That, of course, is a sacking offence, so it rather depends on how strong Rishi Sunak feels about whether he goes through with it and gets rid of her. And as I've just said, he's got to bear in mind that if she's on the back benches, she could be even more wild.
Talking about backbenches, can we read anything into the fact that there's only been a couple of Tory backbenchers who have defended her in the Commons over this incendiary article?
Yes, the majority of reasonable Tory MPs, and in fairness to them, most of them are reasonable, are absolutely appalled by the language that Suella Braverman has been using. She repeats again in her Times article that these are hate marches. The idea of comparing it with Northern Ireland is just ridiculous and dangerous. What was happening in Northern Ireland was a civil war on UK streets, and marches there had the potential of causing shootings and bombings, and that's why some of those were banned. We're nowhere near that here. It also is undermining Sir Mark Rowley's ability to police this demonstration when he's getting unhelpful noises off from his own boss, the Home Secretary.
Nigel, these are extraordinary developments we're seeing this morning. Your interpretation is that this update further that we might hear today from the Prime Minister's spokesman from Number 10 could be an update on the future of the Home Secretary. Are we really sitting here thinking that the Home Secretary could lose her job today? Is it that serious?
Yes, it is that serious. And I think that the word very much was actually could lose her job. Whether Rishi Sunak will go that far, we'll have to see. But if you've got a cabinet minister who accepts collective responsibility, putting an article through Number 10 as they are required to do, and then not making the amendments that Number 10 asked for, that is a sacking offence.
What about, Nigel, the timing of this, though, if indeed he does sack her? Because we now know that next Wednesday the Supreme Court will rule on government's Rwanda policy. So this would be quite dodgy timing, wouldn't it, for Suella Braverman to go?
It would be, but it's timing of Suella Braverman's choice. She must know that interventions like this are not only unhelpful, but actually stoke up and inflame what is going on at the weekend. So she has chosen to do that. I think it does come down to very much about just how strong the Prime Minister feels in his position, whether he takes action against her.
Just finally, Nigel, isn't it the case that Suella Braverman speaks for a huge proportion of the Conservative coalition, a huge proportion of voters that, frankly, the Prime Minister cannot afford to lose? These are people that he needs to be winning back, not losing, if he's within any hope of winning the next election. Frankly, didn't the Home Secretary's article reflect a lot of that opinion? The feeling in much of the country that the police take sides on these protests and behave very differently towards far-right marches than they do towards Islamist marches, for example.
Well, no, I think that's actually complete nonsense, what she's saying there. What the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Mark Rowley, is saying is, look, Parliament make the law. The police are there to police them, quite rightly. And this march on Saturday has not met the threshold of causing the kind of disorder that would require it to be banned. Now, I think most people would actually accept the police should be operationally independent. They're not a political arm of the Home Office. And so when Suella Braverman comes out with comments like this, the people will recognise that she is stoking up problems rather than calming them down.
OK, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, thanks very much for your analysis on that. Well, let's talk to legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg, who can join us now. Good afternoon to you. Is Suella Braverman stoking up division here with this article?
Well, look at what she said. I think this is the key paragraph. She says, "I do not believe that these marches are merely a cry for help for Gaza. They are an assertion of primacy by certain groups, particularly Islamists, of the kind we are more used to seeing in Northern Ireland. Also disturbingly reminiscent of Ulster are the reports that some of Saturday's March group organisers have links to terrorist groups, including Hamas." Now, she talks about Islamists, she talks about links to terrorist groups. She obviously has evidence for that. It's the comparison with Northern Ireland, which has clearly concerned a lot of people. Nobody's said that before. Yes, she is obviously skating on very thin ice, as your political commentator has said.
It is extraordinary that we are sitting here in the position whereby we're talking now seriously about the Prime Minister perhaps about to fire someone who holds one of the great offices of state. Is it really that level of consequence for an article like this?
Well, it can be, because, as your commentator Nigel has explained, it's all about collective responsibility. If you are in the cabinet, you must follow the party line, literally. And if you are choosing to go off on what lawyers call a frolic of your own, if you are simply taking your own path down this very sensitive area, of course you're going to upset the Prime Minister. And as we've seen, as you've heard, Rishi Sunak, has got to decide whether to assert his authority. I mean, there's always somebody who can serve as Home Secretary. Suella Braverman resigned as Attorney General previously. She resigned certainly for a while, and she was reinstated in the government after a few days.
Well, wasn't the point, though, there that her reinstatement, which took a lot of Westminster by surprise, was because Rishi Sunak felt like he needed allies on the right of the party. He'd lost to Liz Truss, he became Prime Minister without an election. He needs the support of people like Suella Braverman, otherwise he loses a huge chunk of his coalition.
That's perfectly true, but equally he presumably doesn't particularly want somebody who refers quite specifically to Islamists and groups that have links to terrorist groups. He's going to upset a considerable number of people in this country if he allows her to say that. So he's got to balance these politically.
Is not partly the job of the Home Secretary to calm everything down? She knows exactly what has been going on this week in terms of the debate surrounding this Armistice Day protest or peace march, as some people are calling it. And all she's done is potentially inflame these tensions and made it a heck of a lot more difficult for the police.
I think that's perfectly fair. I mean, the crucial point about her Times article is she accepts the position that the Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, is in that it is his decision. And she says at the beginning, we pride ourselves on our long-established traditions of freedom of expression. The right to protest is a cornerstone of democracy. Only in the most exceptional circumstances do the authorities step in. So in that sense, she is saying exactly what the Police Commissioner said. He says we haven't got to the exceptional circumstances which justify him stepping in.
I mean, she just seems to, when you look at the article, she seems to generalise. She talks about poppy sellers being mobbed. Well, we saw poppy sellers surrounded by protesters, but we don't actually know whether those poppy sellers were forced to walk away or felt intimidated.
They look quite
we
uncomfortable.
also, when you look at the photo, they were not being mobbed, and there's been poppy sellers today that are saying we are still going to go to train stations, we are still going to sell poppies. They're not intimidated enough to stay away from it.
I think Suella Braverman is right to refer to a great deal of unease, and it goes much further than that, among many people, particularly the Jewish community, but many others as well, at the sort of things that have been said in this march. And one of the things that she says very clearly is the police have got to deal with disorder, they've got to make arrests, they've got to deal with people who break the law. And nobody would deny that. Exactly how they do it, whether they pull people out of a crowd, whether they take pictures of people and then summon them later, is obviously an operational matter for the police. She's right to say that the police must do their job, and she isn't actually saying in this piece that they were wrong when they said that they were not going to ban the procession, which is due to take place on Saturday.
Just finally, she does also make a comparison in this article between the way that the police attend some protests versus others. She particularly points out the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer of 2020 that occurred during lockdown, and people were not arrested simply for gathering then, whereas other gatherings, of course, people were arrested. Do you think there's legitimacy in this idea of a two-tier justice system?
I've heard a lot of people assert that. I've never heard a Home Secretary assert that. And your broad point that she perhaps shouldn't be taking sides on these matters is, I think, a very fair one. Some people think that what's happened is very disturbing and damaging and intimidating and frightening. Some people think that the police are treating people differently. The police would say, we're simply trying to keep the warring sides apart, we're allowing people to let off steam, we're trying to make sure that it doesn't clash with other matters, we're keeping them away from the cenotaph, we're keeping the timing different. That's how the police normally operate, and you're absolutely right to say it doesn't make it any easier when the Home Secretary intervenes in this way.
I think a former Met Assistant Commissioner has said that ministers are now on the verge of behaving unconstitutionally. Are we at that point now?
Well, the Constitution is very flexible. That's the great thing about the British Constitution. You make it up as you go along. I think that a lot of people are surprised that somebody in her position, as you say, Home Secretary, great office of state, behaves in this way. Slightly more worrying when she said things like this when she was Attorney General. She is entitled to say what she thinks, but the Prime Minister is entitled to say that's not government policy, and perhaps out you go.
Well,
Joshua,
there we go.
really appreciate your contribution to this discussion. Thank you for coming in.
Not at all.
Potentially a belligerent Home Secretary, but not as belligerent as Winston Churchill when he was Home Secretary and attended one of these protests, goading on the police to attack the protesters in the 1920s. I don't think we're quite at that point yet. But you're with GB News Live with Pip Thompson and me, Tom Harwood. Got plenty more to bring you in just a moment, so don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. Now, earlier this morning, pro-Palestine protesters scaled the roof of the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah, we hope to be able to show you some pictures of this. Protesters hung a banner from Holyrood calling for the UK government to stop providing arms to Israel. Now, it comes as the Scottish Green Party also called for a halt to arms sales to Israel. It involved 5 protesters climbing up the awning outside the main entrance, displaying the flag, and happened just before First Minister's questions at midday. But the group of protesters who climbed the Scottish Parliament do say that they are not part of an organisation. Police Scotland say they are aware of the protest and officers are in attendance.
Well, we'll try and get those pictures to you a little bit later in the programme. But in the meantime, fighting between the Israeli military and Hamas has been continuing overnight, with Israel claiming to have taken a Hamas stronghold in northern Gaza after a bitter 10-hour battle.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has called for a humanitarian pause in the fighting, which follows the Israeli military's decision to reopen an evacuation road that allows civilians to move from northern Gaza to the south after the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza was closed today.
Well, let's try and make sense of all of this. Delighted to be able to speak to Avi Hyman, who is live in Israel for us. And Avi, thank you for joining us this afternoon. First of all, just to make sense of what has been happening on the ground in Gaza, how far has the IDF now incurred into that territory?
So I can't tell you specifics of operations. What I can tell you is what's already being reported, which is that we have encircled Gaza City. We are closing in on Hamas. And again, reiterate our mission. The mission of the war is to dismantle Hamas, to dismantle their war machine, dismantle their government, so that never again can they perpetrate the type of atrocities that they did to our people on October 7th, breaking through our borders, going from house to house, butchering people, killing babies in their cots with automatic fire, beheading babies, killing children in front of their parents, parents in front of their children, raping and dragging those bodies through Gaza City as trophies, human trophies. Our message is very clear. We're going after Hamas. We're going to free Gaza of Hamas. And that is what's happening now.
You are a spokesperson for the Israeli government. I just wondered whether you can shed any light on the suggestion of a possible ceasefire for perhaps 1 or 2 days that might allow the release of hostages. Is that true, what has been suggested?
So there's a lot of psychological warfare out there from Hamas, a barbaric terrorist organization. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo on the line.
Apologies for that, Avi. If you are able to continue, I'd really appreciate it.
That's much better, thank you. There's a lot of psychological warfare out there. What we're saying is there won't be a ceasefire until we can ensure the end of Hamas, until we can ensure that our hostages, those 240 hostages, including men, women, children, toddlers, and even babies, a baby as young as 9 months old, are brought home, are free. What is being discussed potentially is these pauses, like you say. Now, we've had pauses in the past to free those two terrorists, those two hostages that were freed in the beginning. Then there was another 2 pauses. Temporary pauses is okay. But there's also temporary pauses been going on to allow Gazans to move south. We've called on all of the citizens in Gaza to move south through those humanitarian corridors, through the safer zones. And that has happened. We've seen that. There's some dramatic pictures that we've seen of Israeli soldiers protecting Gazan civilians that want to move out of the crossfire. Because again, our fight is with Hamas.
What do you say to those who protest in the United Kingdom, in some other countries as well? Most recently, in the last hour or so, protesters scaling the Scottish Parliament, unveiling a banner saying, "Stop arming Israel." Do you have a message to those protesters in Scotland, no doubt in London this weekend, and right across the United Kingdom?
Yeah, it's very worrying to see a lot of these protests. This conflict is black and white as the ISIS flags that we found among some of those terrorists that came to butcher our people on October 7th. So if you're through the streets of London or Edinburgh chanting things like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," what you're ultimately saying, and maybe people don't understand this, is you're calling for the genocide, a genocide in Israel. You're calling for the total eradication of the state of Israel, and you're backing an organization that's creed, that's charter, calls for the destruction of Israel and calls to kill Jews everywhere. So as long as people understand what side of history they're on, protest away. But I am very concerned at the sights we're seeing, and I'd go one further. I would say that people that are that much against the state of Israel likely don't like Britain very much either.
But Avi, for some people, it isn't black and white, because although they absolutely accept what happened on October the 7th was barbaric, the more that this death toll in Gaza increases, which we understand now is well into at least 10,000 people, many of them children, that is where Israel starts to lose people's sympathy.
Right, so I'd ask your viewers to be very cautious when listening to numbers coming from the Hamas-run health ministry. Again, these are the same people that were beheading babies just a couple of weeks ago. These are the same people with an interest of inflating numbers, and the same people that are hiding behind their people, committing a double war crime of shooting at civilians from deep within civilian populations and even under civilian populations.
I appreciate, Avi, what you say about being careful about numbers, and absolutely, we can't verify it, but we can see the images coming out of Gaza. We can see the hellhole that civilians are in.
Right. I mean, every civilian life is a tragedy, and Israel is doing its utmost to ensure that we target the Hamas terrorists, which I believe we're doing. We're killing a lot of Hamas terrorists, and we're minimizing civilian casualties like any other army would do. But unfortunately, in every war, there are civilian deaths, and there hasn't been a case in modern warfare where there wasn't. What I will tell you about some of the images that I'm seeing, I saw images just yesterday of a Hamas missile launching site from inside a youth center, inside a Boy Scout center. There was scouting insignia on the wall, and there were missiles out of the window. I saw a children's playground. You see the seesaw on one side, the swings on the other side, and bang in the middle, missile launches. We saw our military uncovered a missile factory just yesterday, just underneath a children's bedroom. You see exactly where they've been manufacturing these missiles. Over 9,000 missiles have been fired at our civilian population. You see where they've made those missiles, and just above, you see a beautiful girl's bedroom, outfitted in pink. This is unacceptable. We ask people to have moral clarity at this time and understand that Israel is doing what any country would do if they're under the type of attack that we're under now.
Avi Hyman, spokesperson for the Israeli government, thank you so much for your perspective and those comments there. Really important to get both sides of this crisis, of course.
Do stay with us. We're going to be talking about the cost of living crisis, which is rumbling on. Living standards in Britain are set to remain at levels not seen since the pre-financial crash in 2006. First, let's get your headlines with Tatiana.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest. Downing Street says the Prime Minister did not clear Suella Braverman's article, accusing the police of playing favourites with pro-Palestinian protesters. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak still has full confidence in the Home Secretary. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davies calling for the Prime Minister to sack her over her claims. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable, while the Labour leader has backed the police.
Across the country, I think we see people who are reasonable, who are moderate, and who would always want to support the police in making difficult decisions in difficult circumstances. And that's what you get with an incoming Labour government if we're privileged to come in to serve. What you've got at the moment is the complete opposite. A Home Secretary who is divisive, who is stoking up tension at the very time that we should be trying to reduce tension, and is undermining the police.
Arrests have been made after the cenotaph in Rochdale was sprayed with Free Palestine graffiti across its base. Greater Manchester Police said poppies were removed from the War Memorial on Tuesday afternoon. It's currently a crime scene. 2 male teenagers are being questioned by police. And a group of protesters have scaled Scottish Parliament to hang a banner and Palestinian flag. The group of 5 climbed up the outside of the main entrance, draping a banner which reads, "Stop arming Israel." Police have cordoned off the area underneath, but business in Parliament is continuing. Police said they're aware of the protest and officers are in attendance. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? Well, if you...
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. Now, real pay has not grown for 17 years. That's according to economists at PwC, which predicts that living standards in Britain will remain at levels they were at before the financial crash in 2006.
And high energy bills are a big part of the reason for those stagnant living standards. The Labour Party claims that the new plans in the King's speech won't help British households struggling with high bills.
Joining us is Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, to discuss all this with On the Money. Liam, there was nothing positive in any of that.
There is some positive economic news out there, and I'll pepper what I'm about to say with some little glimmers of light. Look, there's lots and lots of economic data out at the moment, and this is the way it's going to be until the general election. The general election could be in a year's time, could be before. It's going to be about the economy, and both parties are cranking up their economic messages, and other organisations are producing data in order to make that happen. Let's have a look at some data now. I want to talk first about the UK high street. We know that in a lot of cities, and particularly our towns, the high street's suffering. These figures are from the British Retail Consortium. They show that retail sales across the country were up 2.5% in October compared to October 2022. It doesn't sound bad, but that's slower than the 2.7% growth that we saw in September. And it's below, Tom and Pip, the 12-month average. So over the last 12 months, that increase has averaged 4.2%. So you can see their retail sales are slowing down. And here's the kicker. All these numbers are what we call nominal numbers. They're before inflation. And if you add inflation, inflation's 6.7% on the latest data. So you can see there that the value of high street sales in the UK has actually fallen in what we call real terms. That's after inflation, and that's not a great sign. So what else do we know? In the last 24 hours, there's been a couple of important economic events. There's a big think tank in central London, in Westminster, completely cross-party. It's been around since the 1950s. It's called the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. It's not as well known as the Institute for Fiscal Studies, but it's probably more august. It doesn't say things very often, and it's full of independent economists. And what are the National Institutes saying in their latest report? They're saying, and we've got another graphic, they're saying that interest rates have peaked. That's quite important. They are judging that the Bank of England will now not raise interest rates anymore. So they're going to be peaking at 5.25%, what they currently are. So the next move in interest rates is down. That's a good bit of news if you've got a mortgage or personal debts. The National Institute's also saying that wage growth will be 7% roughly in 2023 and 2024.
That's above inflation.
That's above inflation. But what they're also saying, the National Institute, is that half of UK households, their pay and their broader household income won't hit pre-pandemic levels, so 2019 levels. 2020 was the first year of the lockdown, of course, until 2026. That is the impact of lockdown. And then, as you two pointed out at the top of this item, you also talked about this report from PwC. It's PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big accounting firms. They're saying, PricewaterhouseCoopers, if you add in everything that's happened since the global financial crisis, which was 2008, 2009, the income squeeze, the fact we've had quantitative easing, which has lowered interest payments that people have got on their savings, PwC are saying that household incomes won't recover, that basically we're still at 2006 levels in terms of household incomes. So we're yet to fully recover from the global financial crisis, which is an astonishing state of affairs.
I mean, this really matters. This is a generation now that has not seen increasing living standards. Ever since before the Second World War, we expected each new generation would be richer than the one that became before it. And now we're seeing, potentially for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, we'll have a generation for which that is not true.
That's exactly right. The natural order of things is that your kids are better off than you. That's kind of the British dream. That's what keeps politics moderate, because people think, well, at least my kids will do better than me if I work hard and we do the right thing. Tom, you and I have talked about this a lot. Today's generation of 25 to 34-year-olds, they're paying more for their housing, whether they're renting or paying a mortgage, and they're less likely to own their own home than any generation since the 1930s. And, you know, I write and talk about this all the time. I don't think the media gives it nearly as much attention as we should. These economic issues which people really care about. And it is the case that we are yet to recover. I mean, GDP overall, the whole economy, we're back to pre-pandemic levels, but actual household incomes in real terms, adjusted for inflation, aren't. And this is why politics has becoming so venal, so contestable, so bad-tempered, because the cake is getting smaller, so it's harder to cut the cake in a way that pleases everybody.
So when people say, as I keep hearing, oh, well, interest rates in my day were double figures, is that an argument that is completely flawed? OK,
again, I've said this on GB News at least 10 times, and I'll say it again. Interest rates in the late 80s, early 90s, yeah, they were 12, 15%. But houses were much, much cheaper as a share of national income. Back then, the average home was 4 or 5 times the average annual income, OK? Now the average home is 8 to 10 times the average annual income. So Tom's generation, who have got mortgages that are like 3, 4, 5, 6%, OK? They're paying a much, much higher share of their take-home pay on their mortgages than my generation was when we were paying mortgages at 10, 11, 12%. Yeah. Why? Because the houses that they're buying are so much more expensive compared to their average income. So the share of income on their housing is higher. So when you hear, you know, your uncle in the corner in the pub saying, oh, in my day we used to say we didn't eat avocado sandwiches or go to Ibiza, and we managed to buy a house, Utter rubbish, because this generation of kids are paying a lot more for their housing, even at today's relatively low rate of interest. And guess what? I'm not saying it's going to happen. If interest rates go up even more, the squeeze on them is going to become even tighter.
Yeah, 12% on a borrowed £50,000 is a lot less than 6% on a borrowed £500,000.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
I will pass your number on next time I'm in the pub. Thank you, Liam.
Well, much, much more to come in the show, of course. We'll be talking through hundreds of volunteers and armed forces personnel from the Royal Navy, British Army and Royal Air Force are in Manchester to raise money for the Royal British Legion's Poppy Appeal.
They'll be handing out poppies and collecting donations at transport hubs and offices throughout the city in the biggest street collection of its kind outside London.
Well, our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is in Manchester for us today. And Sophie, I see you've got a guest with you. Take it away.
I have indeed. Joining me is Bernard Morgan, who, Bernard, you were the youngest sergeant, I believe, who landed on D-Day on Gold Beach. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Tell me about the day you landed on D-Day. Talk to me a bit about what happened.
Well, the weather, we'd sailed all the way from Felixstowe on the east coast to the Isle of Wight on the south coast. And on that journey, the weather was very, very rough. As a result, D-Day should have originally been on the 5th of June, but because of the bad weather, it was put back to the 6th of June. When we got to the Isle of Wight, codenamed Piccadilly Circus, the harbour master there told our captain we couldn't stop there because there were hundreds of other crafts coming in. So he sent us off to Normandy. We couldn't do any code and ciphering because to operate our machine, which was called a Type X machine, we had to be on dry land and have power from generators supplied by the army. And we were anchored off Normandy on the night of the 5th of June, and I was a youngest sergeant, and I got all the odd jobs, including manning a Bren gun on the landing ship tank for 2 hours. The enemy aircraft were flying overhead, but they weren't low enough to fire at. And back of us were our battleships, including HMS Belfast, firing at the Atlantic Wall. The Atlantic Wall was firing back, and sadly, some of the shells from the Atlantic Wall were dropping short and landing on the vessels waiting to go ashore, which was a 25-mile stretch along the Normandy coast. And you looked down and you saw some of the landing craft going up in smoke because some of the shells had been made by slave labourers in Germany, and they'd not made them properly on purpose. We didn't know this at the time, and they were dropping short. Instead of going at 10 miles to hit our battleships, they were dropping on the landing craft, and that was a sad sight to see. We didn't land. The army went in at 5 o'clock in the morning. We didn't land until 6:30 in the afternoon, and we were in our vehicle, which was like a mobile classroom, carrying 2 Type X machines, which were very heavy machines. Took 4 men to lift them. The keyboard was like a present-day computer, and to decode the messages, we were receiving messages. When we got on land, the wireless operators were giving us messages which they'd received in groups of 5 scrambled letters. And I was a typist in civilian life, and whenever I went on watch, I always got the decoding job, because the quicker you could decode a message, the quicker the Air Force could get the aircraft where the Army wanted them. We had an Army officer based with us.
Bernard, his story is so fascinating. Bernard and I have met previously, and hearing his full story is so fascinating. And that just shows exactly why the work done by the Royal British Legion during the Poppy Appeal is so important. It's supporting veterans like Bernard and our current veterans as well. So if you can, make sure you support the Poppy Appeal this year.
Sophie, I hope Bernard won't be offended, but I'd love to know, how old is Bernard?
Bernard, they're asking me how old you are. Would you mind revealing to the nation how old you are?
No.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
I should be 100 in February, all being well.
So there you go. He's 99 years old, but I think you're very well kept for 99, Bernard. You'd never know.
Oh, he's absolutely fantastic.
Arthritis in this leg. And when I was younger, I used to do a lot of track running.
No wonder you're still so fit then. There you go, track runner. So he said his only problem is arthritis in his knee.
Well, that's the secret to it.
Athletic team, 1943, and I specialised in the 1 mile. The world record was 4.6, mine was 4.16.
Well, there you go. Almost a world record holder. Bernard, thank you so much for your time. Honestly, amazing speaking to you.
Right.
I would love to see a picture of Bernard in his youth as well, when he was serving.
Oh, absolutely. And many happy returns for February, which actually isn't that far away now.
It's not, is it? 99 years old. Yeah. If all you've got is a bit of arthritis in your leg, I think you're OK.
Absolutely. Well, finally this hour, today is the final day of The Guardian versus the Home Office Tribunal over royal security costs.
The Guardian is challenging the government's refusal to tell the public how much taxpayer money is spent on protecting the King and the royal family. So, Cameron, we don't have a huge amount of time. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, give us the headlines.
I'll try and rattle it through. So the true cost of royal protection has always remained a secret. The government is challenging the Guardian challenging the Home Office because they refuse to give the information under a Freedom of Information request. Now, the key points are the Home Office is saying that any potential attackers would gain a mosaic of information if the costs were released to the public, which would be a substantial step in increasing the risk of an attack. And there will be valuable new inferences, in other words, educated guesses that attackers could make if they have access to the finance of all of this. The Guardian's KC, Stephen Cragg, in return, is basically saying that as long as the information is generalised, there's nothing significant that could be given to potential attackers that would increase the likelihood of an attack. And it's in the public interest for us to have an informed discussion about the monarchy. Because at the moment, we know the sovereign grant, the taxpayers' money that funds the monarchy, is around £86 million a year. But that does not include the security bill. So the tribunal is continuing today.
But of course, the royal family has an effective tax rate of around 90% on the Crown estate, which is where they get their sovereign grant money from. So I suppose if we were to count whatever the security bill is against the Crown estate profits and the tax that the UK gets from that, the billions in tax, I believe, from that, it's surely going to be less than that.
I suppose the argument would be that the percentage of the Crown estate profits used to fund the sovereign grant is normally, on a normal year, 15%. But, of course, it would be, perhaps, the argument would be a lot higher if you also included the security bill that the Metropolitan Police is paid to protect the royal family. So I suppose that's the argument that the Guardian is making.
How long is this likely to last for?
So today is the final day, so we should have an answer, in theory, by the end of today, whether judges are going to order the Home Office to release that financial information. But it would be a huge step, because government ministers' security bills, that's also very much secret. But that is in contrast to the United States, because the presidential security bill is very much public. So it's a bit of a difference there between the UK and the United States.
It's curious that the Guardian is going after the royal family, but not going after the politicians for the security bill. That
well, they might
like
do if they win this case.
Yeah, it could open a can of worms.
Starting with the royals.
Well, the Guardian's argument is that the royal family is shrouded in secrecy and they're far less accountable than government ministers, and therefore it informs the public debate around whether or not we should have a monarchy in the first place. I think that's what the Guardian's going with.
They want to start that conversation.
Yeah.
I would suggest to the Guardian they're more likely to be able to get rid of a politician than they would the king. But there we go. Seems like their priorities are in the symbolic rather than the political.
Do stay with us here on GB News Live. Plenty more to come, including Labour accusing the Home Secretary of encouraging extremists on all sides.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, thanks for being with us. It is 1 o'clock and you're with GB News Live with Pip Thompson and Tom Harwood. Coming up.
Downing Street have declined to say whether Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman have a, quote, good working relationship. This comes as Labour accuses the Home Secretary of encouraging extremists and attacking the police when she should be backing them.
But Labour themselves are not without their own challenges as Sir Keir Starmer faces an ever more difficult battle to keep his party united after several of his own MPs tried to force a Commons vote on a ceasefire in Gaza.
Including some former shadow cabinet ministers. But we'll also have the very latest from Israel itself as the IDF claim they've taken over a Hamas stronghold in northern Gaza after a 10-hour battle. An Israeli spokesman will update us.
And if you're a parent, maybe of little ones, how would you fancy buying a baby perfume for £230?
A baby perfume, let me get this right. This isn't a perfume that smells like babies for yourself. This is a perfume you put on your baby.
What do you think about that idea? It's been launched, this perfume, by luxury fashion brand Dior. We'd love to know what you think about it. And would you pay that much money for it? GBviews at gbnews.com. All that and more to come. First, let's get your headlines with Tatiana.
Pip, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Downing Street says the Prime Minister did not clear Suella Braverman's article accusing the police of playing favourites with pro-Palestinian protesters. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak still has full confidence in the Home Secretary. Liberal Democrats leader Sred Davies calling for the Prime Minister to sack her over her claims. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. Well, the Labour leader has backed the police.
Across the country, I think we see people who are reasonable, who are moderate, and who would always want to support the police in making difficult decisions in difficult circumstances. And that's what you get with an incoming Labour government if we're privileged to come in to serve. What you've got at the moment is the complete opposite. A Home Secretary who is divisive, who is stoking up tension at the very time that we should be trying to reduce tension, and is undermining the police.
Arrests have been made after the cenotaph in Rochdale was sprayed with Free Palestine graffiti across its base. Greater Manchester Police said poppies were removed from the War Memorial on Tuesday afternoon, and it's currently a crime scene. 2 male teenagers are being questioned by police. A group of protesters have scaled Scottish Parliament to hang a banner and Palestinian flag. The group of 5 climbed up the outside of the main entrance, draping a banner which reads "Stop Arming Israel." Police have cordoned off the area underneath, but business in Parliament is continuing. Police have said they're aware of the protest. Officers are in attendance. IDF soldiers uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches when they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take the control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Some 80 countries and international organisations are meeting in Paris today to discuss ways of getting humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict, with an additional 163 fatalities in the West Bank. The Foreign Secretary is in Saudi Arabia as part of a diplomatic effort to continue to prevent the Middle East crisis spiralling into wider war. He's holding high-level talks with regional counterparts in efforts to avoid escalation and work towards a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. The Supreme Court is set to give its decision on whether a government plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda is lawful. The Court of Appeal ruled in June the plan to deport those seeking asylum to the East African nation was unlawful. The Home Office challenged that ruling last month. The decision is expected to be made on Wednesday. Dame Pretty and policing of lockdown rules. Dame Pretty lobbied for stricter border controls in the early stages of the COVID pandemic in an attempt to prevent the virus reaching the UK. She was overruled. The NHS waiting list in England has hit a record high, with more people facing delays of more than a year and a half. NHS England found the wait list increased to just over 7.5 million at the end of September. Officials say it's made up of 6.5 million patients, with some waiting for more than one treatment. The overall list is now nearly 3.5 million higher than it was before the COVID pandemic. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder over the fatal stabbing of 15-year-old Alfie Lewis. Alfie was attacked in the Horsforth area of Leeds on Tuesday afternoon as children were leaving 2 nearby schools. The 14-year-old will appear at Leeds Magistrates Court, also charged with possession of a knife. Alfie's family say he was 1 in a million and had the biggest heart. And a Tory MP is claiming areas where fewer than 25 homes are flooded are being penalised because they miss out on a government grant to prevent future damage. Don Valley MP Nick Fletcher says a government grant intended to help residents protect their homes from future flooding events should be open to all. The government's Property Flood Resilience Repair Grant scheme is devolved to councils if more than 25 properties have been severely affected. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now it's back to Pip and Tom.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, you've all been getting in touch with your thoughts and opinions on everything we've been discussing so far in the show. And I have to say, there was a lot of love for our World War II D-Day veteran, Bernard Morgan, at 99 years old. Tony wrote in to say, Bernard's memory in Manchester is amazing. What a fantastic man. He then says, compare him to some of those gutless Palestinian supporters who would run a mile if they had to face what Bernard and the other brave soldiers went through. It's easy to protest. So there's a link that Tony was making there.
Claire Hassel, good afternoon to you. You've been in touch and you say, what a fantastic interview and amazing man. He needs to write a book, had me in tears. And then Andrew says, why did you cut Bernard off? Well, don't worry, we are going to be rejoining Bernard and Sophie, and we will be hearing more from him very shortly. Andrew also says, Bernard, thank you from the household of the Hughes family. So he's touched so many of you.
And of course, one of the reasons we had to move on from Bernard was to hear from that royal story that we covered on this news about the Guardian's case against the royal family, to which Richard has written in saying, the Guardian is seeking to make trouble. Does anyone doubt that a presidential head of state would entail security costs in excess of those granted to the royal family? And Richard's conclusion there is the Guardian is a rag. That's Richard's view on that particular legal case.
Well, let's bring you our top story now. And Downing Street is declining to say whether Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, have a good working relationship. Rishi Sunak is facing calls to sack her over irresponsible and divisive remarks about policing ahead of pro-Palestine protests over Remembrance Weekend.
It follows the Shadow Home Secretary accusing Miss Braverman of encouraging extremists and attacking the police when she was granted an urgent question in the House of Commons earlier today.
Well, joining us now is GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope. Good afternoon to you, Christopher. I think Downing Street is saying that Suella Braverman has Rishi Sunak's full support. I guess that's until she doesn't.
Yeah, it does feel quite iffy today, I think, for the future of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. It all comes down to this overnight article written by her for the Times newspaper. Now, we were informed at GB News first thing when we asked, was it signed off by 10 Downing Street, that it went to the number 10 and then came back, and therefore it was signed off. But number 10 have a different view of that transaction. They say it wasn't signed off. The suggestion was that maybe some changes were suggested from number 10 to the Home Office and they weren't made before it was produced. So the question now is, was this willfully not signed off, this rather inflammatory opinion piece written by the Home Secretary? Was that an attempt to cock a snook almost at the authority of the Prime Minister? And that's where we are at the moment. There's an investigation going on about how this happened and why this idea that it wasn't signed off was understood by the Home Office. For its part, they say they won't comment on internal processes, whereas we have from the number 10 press briefing at 11:30, it's quite clear that it was not signed off. So there's a dispute about whether it was agreed or not, this document, and indeed, therefore, whether the Home Secretary was talking with the authority and the support of the Prime Minister. This one is going to develop through the day.
Now, this is really, really serious, Chris, because we've heard earlier that this process has started, this investigation has started. This is expected to conclude within the day. And if it is found that the Home Secretary willfully ignored collective responsibility, shunned the advice or indeed the diktat of Downing Street, that's a breach of the Ministerial Code, is it not? That's a resignation offence.
The issue of the Ministerial Code, which of course governs behaviour of ministers and is signed off by the Prime Minister at the start of every new Parliament recession, we don't think it's a breach of the code. It certainly is a breach of the PM's authority. Don't forget the PM yesterday sat down with Sir Mark Rowley about these rallies, these Palestinian rallies on Saturday, and whether they would conflict with the very important and solemn marking of Remembrance Day, Armistice Day, at 11 a.m. on Saturday morning. The PM was told there by Sir Mark Rowley that the two would be kept apart. He said, OK, I accept that, but keep it under review. And that's where it left us last night. Then overnight, this large brick was chucked into this mill pond here at Westminster by Suella Braverman, almost undoing all of that work from the PM overnight. It certainly makes him look weak if he feels he can't do something here to try and bring his Home Secretary into line. Don't forget, back at the weekend, there were reports that she supported withdrawing tents from charities that were giving them out or saying they couldn't give tents out to people who are homeless. Those comments were not accepted and adopted by the PM when he spoke to reporters in Norfolk on Monday. So there's two of these transgressions, and we are facing a very big fortnight for the Prime Minister and his Home Secretary. It's very important they work closely together. Next week we're hearing, aren't we, from the Supreme Court about the Rwanda verdict, whether this idea of this Rwanda plan, processing illegal arrivals here offshore in Rwanda, is legal, can go ahead. The following week we've got annual stats for net migration on the day after the autumn statement. It's a very big 2 weeks, I think, for the Home Secretary and Suella Braverman, and right now they clearly are not getting on.
And Chris, obviously you and Tom know the inner workings of politics, but for those people who don't, just explain, because there's plenty of politicians that write comment articles for newspapers. Is it the rule then that it always has to be gone through and signed off?
Yes, unless you have backbench MPs who aren't part of the government, they can submit articles to GBNews' website and we'll publish them, and Number 10 won't know anything about them until they appear. But in the government, the 150 or so members of the government, including private secretaries and other unpaid roles, they've got to submit all of their public utterances to 10 Downing Street. They're then looked at, normally signed off without any problem, and then changes are made, crucially changes are made, and then they appear on our website or in a newspaper. That process has broken down. Clearly, friends of Suella Braverman, as they told me earlier, thought it had been signed off. Number 10 say otherwise, and that investigation, I think, could hold the immediate future of Suella Braverman.
Now, there's a crucial parallel here, I suppose. Earlier this week, the Labour Party lost a shadow minister because he didn't think he could hold this collective responsibility with Sir Keir Starmer on the line that they have over a ceasefire in Gaza. He resigned from the front bench of the Labour Party in order to speak his mind on that issue. I suppose the parallel here is that if the Home Secretary wants to speak her mind on this issue without the sort of collective responsibility of the Cabinet table, she would need to walk away. When are we expecting a conclusion in this really, really high-stakes investigation?
Well, it won't take long. As I said before there, Tom, time is not on the government's side. They've got to get their act together and work out a collective view to support the police on what will be a very difficult day, whether or not the Palestinian march goes ahead Saturday and then maybe Sunday, but certainly Saturday is an important day. And after that, on a policy level, you've got these very big immigration numbers coming out. You've got the Rwanda decision next week, which will define really whether the Tories can recover in the polls for many people. If they can get away, if they can get this idea away and make it start happening, there's a chance they can start controlling these small boats arrivals. It's so important right now that they are working in lockstep together, the Home Secretary Number 10, but they aren't. So that needs to be sorted out soon.
Hard to overstate the importance of that Rwanda decision coming in less than a week's time. And, of course, so many bumps in the road for Home Affairs policy. A really extraordinary day. Christopher Hope, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest in what appears to be a rift between the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister.
And as you would expect, Sir Keir Starmer has been commentating on all this. He's been speaking, actually, at the offices of my old newspaper, the Express and Star newspaper in Wolverhampton. He's been doing a Q&A session, and he says that the Home Secretary is divisive and we have a Prime Minister who is too weak to do anything about it. But not everything's rosy in Labour land either, is it, Tom?
No, it certainly isn't. And I think one of the crucial things there is that the Labour line here is that the Prime Minister is weak in not sacking her, rather than going after the Home Secretary directly. It will be very, very interesting to see what the Prime Minister decides, because to some extent she's quite crucial for Rishi Sunak as a sort of bastion of the right of the party, and he doesn't want to divide his party more, perhaps create a leadership contender against him. But of course, as we were saying, Sir Keir Starmer is facing some pretty tough times himself, a more difficult battle to keep his party united after quite a few of his own MPs have tried to force a Commons vote on this Gaza ceasefire, attaching an amendment to the King's speech. That came hours after Bradford East MP and Shadow Minister Imran Hussein resigned from the Shadow front bench so that he could advocate for that ceasefire.
And those rebellious MPs could soon get their wish, because the SNP has tabled an amendment to the King's speech calling for an immediate truce in the war. And if selected, it will force Labour MPs to show their hand and could expose the extent of the divisions within Sir Keir Starmer's party. Well, in this question and answer session that I was just mentioning, Sir Keir Starmer has reiterated his call for a humanitarian pause to allow medicines and food into Gaza. He says it is the only realistic option in the face of a desperate situation.
But of course, a pause is not a ceasefire, and that's where the division within the Labour Party lies. Let's get more now from GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. And Catherine, this is a crucial distinction. There is speculation that potentially hundreds, or at least over 100 Labour MPs disagree with Sir Keir Starmer on his position. How likely is it that this will get smoked out in the form of an amendment?
Yes, well, it's fairly likely that there may well be a vote on whether to back a ceasefire or not next week, because the Scottish National Party are intent on tabling that. If it's selected by the Speaker, and bear in mind they're the third largest party, it will go ahead. Now, that will be exceedingly difficult for Labour. Sir Keir Starmer was here in Wolverhampton just a little earlier, talking to local people, local students, talking to broadcasters. But he's saying this is all coming from the same place, whether it's a ceasefire, whether it's a humanitarian pause. Who doesn't want to see an end to the horrors in Gaza, with the death toll now over 10,000? But it is an important distinction, because the Labour leadership is calling for a humanitarian pause. That's something short, something temporary, to get aid in, to get people out. But a ceasefire is rather different, isn't it? It's longer term, and Sir Keir Starmer believes, along with the position of the British government, which is the same, and the United States, that would allow Hamas to regroup, to rearm themselves, to get stronger again, just as Israel is trying to destroy them. So it is an important distinction, and for all that Sir Keir Starmer is trying to play down divisions within his party, it's pretty clear that they run really rather deep. There's now over a third of Labour MPs and about 17 front benchers who have clearly come out in favour of a ceasefire in defiance of his position. And yesterday, of course, we had that first shadow front bench resignation for Imran Hussein, who had been, a shadow minister for 8 years. So now Sir Keir Starmer wouldn't be drawn on the hypotheticals of what might happen in a vote that may or may not, as he said, be called. But certainly, I think it is pretty likely that there will be a vote sooner or later, and probably rather sooner. And at that point, what does he do? Because, of course, he could give a free vote, so MPs can vote with their conscience. That possibly might be the most likely. He might probably be accused of being weak, a failure of leadership if he did that. Or he could put his foot down and threaten consequences. But at that point, we might see a string of resignations.
Sir Keir Starmer was also asked, Catherine, about his views on the Home Secretary, and as you would expect, he was not very complimentary. He called her divisive and says that she's doing the complete opposite of what most people in the country would see as the proper role of the Home Secretary.
Yes, that's right. Sir Keir Starmer was very clear that it is an operational matter for the police whether or not a protest goes ahead, and it is not for the Home Secretary to be interfering or being divisive, as he maintains that she is. Of course, she's used very strong language over these protests, hasn't she? In the last week or so, she's referred to them as hate marches on several occasions. She's upped the ante over and over again, culminating with this letter in the Times. Now, Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey has called for her to be sacked. Sir Keir Starmer was asked, would he go that far? He didn't answer that. But they have put out, Labour, a rather punchy ad on social media in the last hour or so saying spineless, with Rishi Sunak sort of looking rather wavy at the front of the S, because they basically are saying, look, he's weak. He doesn't like what she's saying. He hasn't got the authority to get rid of her. But of course, many people will be looking at the Labour Party and thinking that Sir Keir Starmer doesn't have that much authority at the moment, on this matter at least, either.
GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster in Wolverhampton for us this afternoon. Thank you.
Now, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights says that Israel and Hamas have both committed war crimes since the conflict began. Well, we'll hear from a Middle East expert and get to the bottom of how trustworthy that UN statement really is. Matt, and much, much more coming up after this.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good to have you with us. Welcome back to GB News Live. As fighting between the Israeli military and Hamas continues, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights has claimed that both Israel and Hamas have committed war crimes since the conflict began.
Meanwhile, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, has called for a humanitarian pause in the fighting, which follows the Israeli military's decision to reopen an evacuation road that allows for civilians from northern Gaza to move south after the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza was closed today.
Well, Professor Yossi Mikkelberg is from the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House and joins us now. Good afternoon to you. Let me ask you, first of all, how you read it about this suggestion that war crimes have been committed by both Hamas and Israel.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It has to be investigated. And eventually there are criteria how war is conducted and how it's not conducted. It will be very difficult to assume that in this war no war crimes have been committed, considering the level of violence, the level of casualties, death. I will be surprised. I'm not an international lawyer, but I look at the pictures and the images, and I'll be very surprised if by the end of the war the conclusion won't be that war crimes have been committed.
It is the UN getting stuck in a situation whereby this organisation has been accused by the Israeli government of being too much on the side of Hamas, trying to equate a democratic country defending itself with a terrorist group that slaughtered civilians, specifically went after civilians, rather than the Israeli government, which would say it is trying to target terrorists, and sadly, occasionally civilians get caught in the crossfire. Is there not a moral distinction there?
Well, I think we are all convinced that the UN doesn't serve the purpose that it was assigned to it back in 1945. Unfortunately, the Security Council, even the General Assembly, don't manage to avert war, prevent wars, making peace and sustainable peace. And this is very regrettable. But, we're talking about the UN. We can't separate it from the member state. It's the member state that creates it. We see it when you have a permanent member like Russia that actually declared war on another country and then veto everything. The United States veto whenever the criticism of Israel. There is the fact the UN is completely paralyzed. But I think we are really diverting from the real issue. What Hamas did was a terrible, terrible atrocity, an unforgivable atrocity. And when we see these images, they're sickening. And as a result of it, it excluded itself from probably the political process for a long time. It completely changed. But at the same time, are you suggesting that he justifies killing by now thousands and thousands of Palestinians, civilians and children? It can't be justified either. It just shows that not dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, leaving conflicts to fester, and in this killing. And I think instead of just taking side one or the other, I think the most important thing is to stop this conflict and bring it to a peaceful end.
How can you bring it to a peaceful end, Yossi, when you are effectively dealing with a proscribed terrorist organisation? There's not a chance that they are going to want to have a ceasefire.
I wish you asked me this a year ago, 6 months ago, even 7 weeks ago. You see, what you're doing, you're equating all the Palestinians with Hamas. Not all Palestinians are Hamas. And we need to find, this is the art of politics, the art of the possible, to deprive Hamas of support, and creating the coalition of the willing, those who want to live in peace. As someone that has worked on this issue for decades now, most Palestinians, and I'm stating the complete obvious right now, want to live in peace, would like to live in a two-state solution. Look at survey after survey, public opinion poll after another. What happened with Hamas has to be dealt, and the Hamas, as we can see, the Israeli army is dealing with that. But to assume that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will never come to a peaceful end is almost as dangerous. All wars come to an end. We have seen this in Europe. after hundreds of years of war, one of the bloodiest wars that humanity ever experienced, Europe is all in all living in peace with one another. So I think that's the way that should look at conflict. It's a terrible situation, but we should be creative. Both sides need new leadership, new ideas, and ideas that appeal to people and deprive then organizations like Hamas, like Islamic Jihad of their support.
Of course, what Israel would say to that point, that there is a distinction between the people of Gaza and Hamas, is that Hamas was elected into the position it holds today by the people of Gaza when Israel withdrew and took its troops out, and every single Jew was expelled from that territory. Afterwards, Hamas came to power, of course, abolished elections, but have been embedding themselves across that strip of land for a long time. And we've seen evidence that when, for example, one of those young girls from that music festival was dragged naked through the streets of Gaza, ordinary people, not Hamas leadership, ordinary people were out there cheering that corpse being dragged through the streets. Is it really potentially fair to say that there's no widespread support for Hamas in Gaza? Is it not the case that there is quite widespread support for Hamas in Gaza? And is that not one of the deep problems?
Are you trying to convince me that what Hamas did is horrible, as anyone will ever support something like this? It's terrible. This is a war crime, what they did. I've seen the images. Trust me, it's very upsetting.
But I think that the point that Israel would make is that can I just put this specific point?
Let me finish, please. Let me finish. You started. It's an interview. Listen, you need to understand also history. Israel withdrew unilaterally from Gaza instead of empowering the PLO at the time and the PA and handing Gaza to the more moderate, the one that wanted to sign the agreement. He decided to completely sideline them and created a vacuum. The people that you are talking about supporting Hamas, this was 2006. This is almost ancient history. Almost most of the population in Gaza right now not even born in 2006. It's one of the youngest population. And since then, they are the one that suffer from Hamas and living after Hamas. And I think you and I would agree that it's not nice to live under the rule of Hamas in any shape or form. But by blockading people, but not allowing for a peace process to actually develop, we are pushing them into the hands of radicals. We don't do the opposite.
Well, Professor Meckelberg, it has been a really interesting conversation. I wish we had more time. Perhaps we'll have to get you back very soon. But I'm afraid we've got to go to our latest news headlines now. See you after this.
Tom, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Downing Street says the Prime Minister did not clear Suella Braverman's article, accusing the police of playing favourites with pro-Palestinian protesters. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak still has full confidence in the Home Secretary. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Davies calling for the Prime Minister to sack her over her claims. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. Well, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called Braverman out of control.
Across the country, I think we see people who are reasonable, who are moderate, and who would always want to support the police in making difficult decisions in difficult circumstances. And that's what you get with an incoming Labour government if we're privileged to come in to serve. What you've got at the moment is the complete opposite. A Home Secretary who is divisive, who is stoking up tension at the very time that we should be trying to reduce tension, and is undermining the police.
2 male teenagers are being questioned by police after the cenotaph in Rochdale was sprayed with Free Palestine graffiti across its base. Greater Manchester Police said poppies were removed from the War Memorial on Tuesday afternoon, and it's currently a crime scene. A group of protesters have scaled Scottish Parliament to hang a banner and a Palestinian flag. The group of 5 climbed up the outside of the main entrance, draping a banner which reads, "Stop arming Israel." Police have cordoned off the area underneath, but business in Parliament is continuing. Police have said they're aware of the protest and officers are in attendance. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2259 and €1.1465. The price of gold, £1,588.37 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,439 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, "Alexa, play GB News." We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Liam Halligan is here in a moment to talk everything economy. And we understand that real pay has not grown for 17 years. So we want to ask him about that. Plus...
But also, it could be the case that interest rates have peaked. So perhaps mixed economic news. Let's make sense of it all with Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, with On the Money. Liam, it seems like every day we get some news that's good and some news that's bad. What's the actual picture?
Oh, for a one-handed economist. We always say on the one hand, Look, it is mixed. Mixed is a good word. Patchy might be another good word. There's so much economic news around today, and tomorrow there's going to be even more. There's new GDP numbers coming out tomorrow telling us the extent to which the UK economy has grown or, excuse me, hasn't grown. I think that GDP number could be very, very flat. But that's for tomorrow. Today, there's been lots of numbers out about living standards, as you say, about retail sales. So let's have a look at some of them because I've got a graphic. Here we go. So retail sales were up 2.5% in October. That's compared to October 2022. These are numbers from the British Retail Consortium. They're not official government numbers, but they're very, very authoritative. That sounds all right, doesn't it? But it's down from 2.7% growth during the year to September. And across the last year, the 12-month average number is 4.2%. So clearly, retail sales are slowing down. And here's the kicker. When you consider that these are what we call nominal numbers, pre-inflation, and inflation's been 6.7%, that's the current number, then actually retail sales have fallen in what we call real terms after inflation. And that's not good. So we've had all these headlines about M&S doing really well, profits up very strongly, 51%. WH Smith, we spoke in the last hour, didn't we? Their travel stores, particularly, airports and train stations, their profits are up 96% in the last year.
WH Smith in my town has shut down.
Because on the high street, WH Smith isn't doing that well. And I just gave you the numbers across the high street. But at travel locations where people are maybe in holiday mood or maybe well-heeled people there are more often travelling more.
£6 for a bag of Maltesers.
That's right. Those stores are doing well. WH Smith stores are doing well. But on the high street, they're not, as you say, and that's reflected in their numbers. But look, I wanted to say, you've got lots of positive headlines about M&S, you've got lots of positive headlines about WH Smith, but the actual across-the-board high street numbers, as I just showed, aren't doing that well. And then on top of that, we had a report from something called the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, a very august, cross-party, independent think tank. It's been around for decades, very highly regarded. And their new report says, and here's a graphic, they are actually saying now, the National Institute are saying, and they don't just make things up off the top of their head, they are now saying that interest rates have peaked. That is interesting, at 5.25%. So the National Institute thinks the Bank of England has done enough to bear down on inflation that we don't need any more interest rate rises. And given that we've had 14 interest rate rises since December 2021, those on variable rate mortgages can take some relief from that if it actually happens. The National Institute's also saying, Tom and Pip, we're going to have average wage growth of 7% this year and next, so that's above inflation, so we are now getting growth in real wages. But the National Institute are also saying that half of UK households, their pay and their broader household income won't recover to pre-pandemic, so that's 2019 levels, until 2026. So you see there, lockdown has taken away 7 years of living standards growth. That's how serious it is. Isn't it astonishing it was barely discussed, as we're hearing now in the COVID inquiry? And then PwC, one of the big four accounting firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers, what they're saying, you referred to 2006, Pip, in your intro, they're saying that it's going to take we're only now getting back to levels of income and household wealth of 2006. So that's kind of the long tail of the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008. Look, it's not all doom and gloom by any means. It does, when the likes of the National Institute are saying interest rates have peaked, they will have thought long and hard about that, and the Bank of England will take note of that. That's got to be a good thing.
The next decision on?
The next decision is in early December.
OK.
The next decision is early December. And next week, on Wednesday, we've got the next inflation number, the inflation number for October. Two big economic landmarks. It does seem to me, unless we get a big energy price spike because of geopolitics or the OPEC oil export cartel squeezing the West some more, the Russians maybe squeezing the West some more, and we get an energy price spike, I think if we avoid that energy price spike, I do think that Rishi Sunak is going to hit his target of inflation halving by December. That doesn't mean he's going to get to the 2% Bank of England target. Oh, no. It means that it's going to get down to 5.2%, because when he made that promise, I'm going to halve inflation, or inflation will halve on my watch, it was at 10.4%.
Liam, I'm afraid we have run out of time on this segment, but it is always good to get the rounded picture. We know if we have Tories on, they'll say half the stats. If we have Labour on, they'll say half the stats. You give us the full picture, and we appreciate
without fear or favour.
Let's move on now, because the Cardiff and Vale University Health Board have issued Wales's largest hospital A-level 4 incident.
Yeah, the University Hospital of Wales says it's experiencing extreme pressures currently.
Well, this comes after a black alert was issued earlier this week because of increasing patients in the emergency department. Well, GB News reporter Jack Carson joins us now from outside the hospital, and hopefully he can make sense of these phrases, black alert, level 4. What on earth does this all mean?
Yeah, so it's better news today, Tom and Pip, than it has been for the last couple of days. This is a de-escalation from the top level 5 black alert, if you like, business continuity incident that the Cardiff and Vale University Health Board declared on the 7th of November. Essentially, there was a combination of different factors. There was real pressure within their emergency department, where patients coming in particularly needed more complex and more critical care than usual. But there was also a combination of not being able to discharge patients quick enough out of things like the emergency department, discharge them into and around other wards on the hospital. And so there were some incidences where patients were waiting in the back of ambulances because they couldn't be brought in the emergency department. The emergency department, particularly here at the University Hospital of Wales, was so busy. But this is a de-escalation to level 4. Now, that does still mean that the emergency department here at this hospital particularly is still undergoing and experiencing extreme pressures. But there has been, they say, a decrease in the patients in the emergency unit, therefore easing pressure generally on staffing levels across the wards. It is a case when you have that level 5, that black alert business continuity incident, that they do start to take nurses, take porters, for example, from other wards around the hospital, meaning those wards are then left understaffed. There is a case on traditionally that the army can be on standby when you are in one of those black alerts, but it's better news today that has now decreased to just extreme pressure. But of course, traditionally over Wales, particularly in 2022, it was at one point during the flu season that all 7 of the health boards across Wales had declared that Category 5 incident. So the fact that we're not even into flu season yet hospitals like this one have been experiencing such extreme pressures will certainly be worrying. But the Welsh Government say that they are putting particularly funding into things like the emergency daycare, they say extra community beds, as well as integrated solutions with social care services to help improve that patient flow, as I was saying, because it's particularly around discharging patients. The hospitals like this are having a problem, because the stats are that 39% of people that are currently waiting and seem deemed fit enough to be discharged aren't being discharged because they're waiting for assessment. Now, that can, of course, link to all kinds of things, such as those understaffing levels on wards, such as the fact that around the NHS, of course, here in Wales, that there aren't maybe enough staff on the wards to be able to properly assess a patient and say they're ready for home, but also because 26% of those people that should be able to be discharged are also waiting for a care home placement. So they're no longer a Category 5 incident here, but it's been downgraded to Category 4. Still extreme pressures at this hospital.
And very quickly, Jack, local people, they're being advised not to attend hospital unless it's absolutely vital. They can help with this situation.
Yes, exactly. So particularly the Cardiff and Vale Health Board saying use 111 to, of course, have that conversation as to whether the operator on the 111 call thinks you should go to the emergency department, because there are all kinds of things such as urgent treatment centres, of course your own GP surgery, where minor injuries can be treated, which means the pressure on the emergency departments like this one won't get to as high levels.
Well, Jack Carson, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest. And, of course, good to see that things are slightly better than perhaps they were yesterday.
Let's talk to you about a tribunal, quite an interesting tribunal that's going on. It's the final day of the Guardian versus Home Office tribunal, which all centres on royal security costs.
Yes, the Guardian challenges the government's refusal to tell the public how much taxpayer cash is spent on protecting the King and the wider royal family. Well, here to tell us more about it is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. And Cameron, it's an interesting tack that the Guardian are going down here. The final day of this court battle today. Why are they so intent in finding something that has always been private?
It has always been secret. The Metropolitan Police are responsible for providing security for members of the royal family. And the Guardian is challenging the Home Office over its decision not to release the information because they put in a Freedom of Information request wanting to have a figure for how much money was spent, of our money, taxpayers' money, on the royal family's protection between the years 2017 and 2020. The kind of security we're talking about here is the armed bodyguards, which are in close proximity to the royal family, and the 24/7 protection of the royal palaces and homes as well. And the Guardian estimates this could potentially cost millions of pounds of our money each year, and argues that by preventing the public knowing the costs, they cannot have full public debate about the role of the monarchy within society. Now, the Home Office, a witness for the Home Office was speaking in court yesterday, or witness statement even, and he said that potential attackers would gain a mosaic of information if the costs of protecting the royal family was revealed. He went on to say that it would be a substantial step in increasing the risk of an attack, and that would-be attackers would gain valuable new inferences, in other words, could have an educated guess about the kind of security that was being provided to the royal family. Now, the Guardian's lawyer, Stephen Cragg KC, said as long as the information's generalised, so it's just a normal figure, there's nothing significant that a potential attacker would have in order to carry out an attack. And it's within the public interest to have an informed discussion about the monarchy and would make the institution more accountable. He also went on to suggest that the sovereign grant, in the Guardian's view, is misleading. So that is the pot of money which taxpayers fund the royal family each year. Last year it was around £86 million. That does not include the Metropolitan Police security protection. And they said that, but another argument that they said was that the public are aware, or journalists are aware, about royal family's engagements in advance, which is perhaps far more of a security risk than just having a figure in terms of money.
This sort of secrecy... Oh, I'm being told we've got to read on. I was getting into that conversation.
OK, then.
Have we got time?
No, I think we've got time for one more question.
Just want to ask
context,
you about this secrecy. It's always been in place, then, down the years.
Yeah.
There's never been any transparency, ever.
It always has been, and let's put it into context. The security surrounding the Prime Minister and government ministers, that has never been made public. The money spent on even former Prime Ministers has never been made public. Bearing in mind we've got 7 former Prime Ministers at the moment, so that is a lot of money, of taxpayers' money, going into protecting public figures. In contrast that to the United States, the money spent protecting the President of the United States is made public every year. So if the judges decide that the Home Office needs to release this information, this could potentially create a whole can of worms, and particularly for the royal family, because it's a bigger challenge to justify the whole true cost of the institution.
I'm willing to bet that whatever we spend on the royal family and the protection of the palaces, it's a hell of a lot less than the Americans would spend on the President of the United States, his multiple planes, 6 helicopters and all of his various residences and retreats.
But huge difference there.
Yeah, just a bit.
I mean, the King doesn't exactly have 2 massive Boeing aircraft that he can fly the world in. Perhaps he should. I don't know. That's one for GB Views at gbnews.com, I think. But Cameron Walker, thank you very much for that latest update on this ongoing court case.
Where are we going next? I think we're going to talk about baby perfume, something completely different, because Dior has launched a $230 fragrance for babies. It's expanded its beauty lineup with a fragrance and skincare range for infants scented by famed perfumer France Kirkjan and released under the Baby Dior line.
Oh, the fragrance, Bon Étoile, has notes of juicy pear, cotton wool and petals. And it's known as an eau de senteur, or a very light perfume, formulated without alcohol to avoid irritation. Goodness me, just reading this, I feel like I need some alcohol now.
Oh, it all sounds like waffle, this. Dior has described it as a baby's very first step into fragrance. I'm sure it's something that the baby is going to remember.
I can't remember a single thing about being a baby. Why? Who would buy this?
I don't think any of us can, Tom.
Who would buy this?
Let us know what you think about that baby perfume.
But more on the future of the Home Secretary coming up after this.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
A very good afternoon. It's 2 p.m. and you're with GB News Live with Pip Thompson and me, Tom Harwood. Coming up this lunchtime.
The Prime Minister is yet again facing calls to sack Suella Braverman. That's not the Prime Minister, obviously. That's after the Home Secretary accused police of playing favourites with pro-Palestinian protesters. It comes as the Home Secretary accused the Met Police of being biased.
However, Labour themselves are not out of the spotlight as Sir Keir Starmer is facing an ever more difficult battle to keep his party united after several of his own MPs have tried to force a Commons vote on a ceasefire in contrary to his position yesterday.
We'll also bring you the latest from Israel as it claims to have taken over a Hamas stronghold in northern Gaza after a 10-hour battle. We'll get a voice on the ground in Tel Aviv.
And in more cheery news, the cost of living crisis could continue for years to come. That's Labour saying that the Tories' plans to bring down energy bills just won't work. Well, we'll find out more after your news headlines.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Downing Street says the Prime Minister did not clear Suella Braverman's article accusing the police of playing favourites with pro-Palestinian protesters. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak still has full confidence in the Home Secretary. Liberal Democrats leader Sred Davies calling for the Prime Minister to sack her. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. The Labour leaders called Braverman out of control.
Across the country, I think we see people who are reasonable, who are moderate, and who would always want to support the police in making difficult decisions in difficult circumstances. And that's what you get with an incoming Labour government if we're privileged to come in to serve. What you've got at the moment is the complete opposite. A Home Secretary who is divisive, who is stoking up tension at the very time that we should be trying to reduce tension, and is undermining the police.
Arrests have been made after the cenotaph in Rochdale was sprayed with Free Palestine graffiti across its base. Greater Manchester Police said poppies were removed from the War Memorial on Tuesday afternoon. It's currently a crime scene. 2 male teenagers are being questioned by police. A group of protesters have scaled Scottish Parliament to hang a banner and a Palestinian flag. The group of 5 climbed up the outside of the main entrance, draping the banner, which reads, "Stop Arming Israel." Police have cordoned off the area underneath, but business in Parliament is continuing. Police said they're aware of the protest and officers are in attendance. IDF soldiers have uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches when they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict, with an additional 163 fatalities in the West Bank. The Supreme Court is set to give its decision on whether a government plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda is lawful. The Court of Appeal ruled in June the plan to deport those seeking asylum to the East African nation was unlawful. The Home Office challenged that ruling last month. The decision on the challenge is expected to be made on Wednesday. Now, the former Home Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, says early in the pandemic there was no ability to prevent coronavirus arriving in the UK through the borders. She made the comments while being questioned at the COVID inquiry, where she's been facing questions about lockdown rules. Dame Priti also made clear to the inquiry that the Department for Health and Social Care was responsible for COVID laws. She lobbied for stricter border controls in the early stages of the pandemic in an attempt to prevent the virus reaching the UK. The NHS waiting list in England has hit a record high, with more people facing delays of more than a year and a half. NHS England found the waitlist increased to just over 7.5 million at the end of September. Officials say it's made up of 6.5 million patients, with some people waiting for more than one treatment. The overall list is now nearly 3.5 million higher than it was before the pandemic. And finally, the Queen has commemorated the nation's war dead at a ceremony at Westminster's Field of Remembrance. Camilla paid tribute and recognised the sacrifices of those who fought and died for their country in her first visit to Westminster Abbey since the coronation. After placing the cross down, Camilla and hundreds of veterans fell silent as the chimes of Big Ben rang out. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now it's back to Tom and Pip.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, a lot of you have been getting in touch about the future of the Home Secretary, which, after a press briefing in Downing Street this morning, has been widely assessed to be in the balance. An investigation is ongoing about who knew what and when over this article in The Times. And Denise has written in to say, regarding the attempt to cancel Suella Braverman and the calls for her resignation, she's the only politician with the courage to speak the truth and voice the concerns of most of the people of this country. The government must not give in to the woke mob. That's what Denise has to say.
Well, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan says he is astonished by the Home Secretary's incorrect and inflammatory Times article. As Tom was saying, there's calls to sack Suella Braverman over her remarks about policing ahead of the pro-Palestine protests this Remembrance Weekend, this Saturday.
Yes, the Shadow Home Secretary has been accusing Miss Braverman of encouraging extremists and attacking the police. That was in an urgent question in the Commons earlier today. Let's join now GB News political editor Christopher Hope. And Christopher, I have to say, I've been going through the inbox of GB News viewers in the last few minutes. The amount of support for Suella Braverman is astonishing amongst GB News viewers. Denise, Roger, Ian, Robert, I could go on. All of these people saying, please don't cancel the Home Secretary. Is she really potentially facing the sack today?
Well, it comes down to this article that she wrote for the Times overnight. Was it signed off or not? Number 10 say on the record it wasn't signed off. Friends of Suella Braverman's tell us at GB News it went in and came out again and then was published, the implication being the version that appeared was the agreed one, but that wasn't according to what Downing Street says. So it's what happened at that point. Did Suella Braverman or someone around just ignore number 10 and thumb their nose at the PM's authority? And if so, in politics, that could be a sacking offence. She has lots of people who don't like her in the centre ground in Tory politics. People, Tory MPs have been telling me she must go. But those 5 names you read out there, the GB News viewers, there's lots of people on the right of the party, members too, who decided the next leader, don't forget, who think what she said was perfectly reasonable, that there is a double standard here when policing protests, or certainly it seems that way. I'm interested there by the remarks from Sadiq Khan you read out there, Tom, because he also said that these remarks could allow the EDL, the English Defence League, to the far and the far right to turn up at the protest this weekend. I think the fact he's saying that might mean that the effect of Suella Braverman's comments might make it easier for Mark Rowley to call off the Palestinian demonstration, because he can only really act when there's a risk to public safety. Now, if these remarks, as Sadiq Khan, who's the Mayor of London, who is one of the 2 bosses of Mark Rowley, the other being Ms Braverman, if he now thinks the EDL are more likely to turn up, that could be a further reason for this march not to go ahead on Saturday.
In terms of her breaking, potentially, the Ministerial Code, just explain to us a little bit more what that is, Chris.
Well, of course, the PM, the Home Secretary, must always talk on the same page. The idea of collective responsibility means that decisions made by the Cabinet are agreed by the whole Cabinet. Even if you disagree with them, you agree with the group of people running the country, the Cabinet. This is a bit different, I think, this, Pip, because it's an article. I mean, it's no more than that, an article in a newspaper, let's be honest about it, but the language is inflammatory. And, of course, when she says these words, we then go back to the PM and say, well, does the Home Secretary have your confidence? We are told at lunchtime, or the 12:30 meeting today, that they do have the confidence in Suella Braverman, but there's now an investigation going on into how this article appeared without the changes made by number 10. The question is, why did that happen? Did the Home Secretary say, I don't agree with those remarks, I'm going to put out as I see fit? Or was there a mistake? Was there a cock-up in communication? Did an email go into the junk or the spam email? We don't know what happened yet. There could be a simple mistake made here by the Home Office to put out a document that was not agreed by number 10. They think it was agreed, but was it? We don't know yet. And that's where her friends tell me they don't think she has to resign over it. But it may be that the PM has grown tired of the distraction of Suella Braverman. Back at the weekend, of course, there was a big row about whether being homeless was a lifestyle choice. Should charities be banned from giving free tents out to the homeless? That now went away. The PM disregarded those comments, moved away from those comments, didn't he, at the start of the week on a visit to North Norfolk. The question is this too much distractions? A big 2 weeks coming up for the Home Office. They've got next week the Rwanda decision at the Supreme Court. The following week, they've got these net migration figures for the full year, probably a very big number again the day after the autumn statement. It's very important the Home Office and Number 10 are walking together in the same direction. Currently, they are miles apart.
And isn't this the crucial political question at the crux of this? Beyond any question of who said what and when, who sent what email and what particular version of what article was published in the Times, beyond all of that, cutting through to the core of this, Suella Braverman represents a constituency amongst Conservative support that, frankly, many people would say the Prime Minister cannot afford to lose. If he fires her or if she walks away, is the risk not that the Prime Minister loses a huge constituency of support in the country, support that would be vital to even having a hope in hell of winning the next election?
That's right, you're totally right, Tom, of course. Suella Braverman was given that job as Home Secretary in that chaotic period in politics in October last year by Rishi Sunak when she came out for his support. Of course, she declared early, didn't she, on an ITV programme last summer, when it was up for grabs who would replace Boris Johnson, stealing a march on rivals like Priti Patel and others on the right. She sits there representing the Tory right. That's why Rishi Sunak knows he can't really get rid of her easily. And if he does get rid of her, she must be replaced by someone from the right. That's why she's so important. And she has almost a free rein to say a few things here and there, which are quite difficult for the left of the party, the centrists, to understand and support. And that's her value. And that's why almost she can hide behind what the Home Secretary is saying sometimes, because she can say those things which he can't say sometimes.
I'll tell you who could replace her, Chris. How about Grant Shapps? He's done every other cabinet job.
I'm not sure they're on the same page politically, Pip, but he is a good communicator. I think he's been given that job in the MOD, I think, to communicate why the Ukraine war is so important for the UK to stay supportive of. He, of course, knows families personally himself. He's a communicator. And, of course, he was, in fact, Home Secretary for a few days. Do you remember, Pip, during Liz Truss's government?
Fleetingly, he was, wasn't he, Chris?
For a couple Fleetingly. So maybe he's done the job already and it's time to move on, Pip.
Not only has he done the job already, he's replaced Suella Braverman already. It went Suella, Grant Shapps, Suella again. So I don't know if we're sort of in this sort of ping-pong of politics. But I suppose one other name in the mix, if we're really speculating that the Home Secretary could lose her job today, which is only speculation, we should hasten to add, is, of course, Priti Patel, who's appearing before the COVID inquiry today.
Yeah. That's right, the MP for Witham. She's, of course, giving her evidence to the COVID inquiry, and certainly she's giving interviews to GBNews. She's talking outside of her old area of politics, which was just crime and punishment, and trying to, I read it, she won't tell me this, but I'm looking at her as an observer of politics for many years, somebody who's trying to augment her appeal to the wider electorate, and I think that's what's going on. She's certainly someone who is liked a lot by the base and who would be expected to challenge the party leadership were Mr Sunak to quit as PM or quit as party leader, all this to be decided by an election in a year or so's time.
It's really interesting. I suppose we have to look at all of these different discussions, all of these machinations, these articles, these appearances before various inquiries, all in the frame of that potential leadership election next year after what is, if we believe the polls, a likely defeat for this government. Christopher Hope, thank you so much for talking through those enormous issues of state for us from our Westminster studio.
I think we were getting a bit of ahead of ourselves talking about replacements.
Yes, no, the investigation has not yet concluded.
Now, Sir Keir Starmer's battle to keep his party united appeared to intensify, or is intensifying, after several of his own MPs tried to force a Commons vote on a ceasefire in Gaza. This just hours after Bradford East MP Imran Hussain resigned from the shadow front bench so he could better call for a ceasefire.
And those rebellious MPs may soon get their wish, of course. The SNP are now tabling an amendment to the King's speech calling for an immediate truce in the war. How relevant that is to the King's speech, I'm not quite sure. But if it's selected, it'll force Labour MPs to show their hand and potentially reveal the extent of those divisions within the Labour Party.
Well, let's speak again with GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Good afternoon to you, Catherine. Some people would say all this infighting with Labour, it's just pointless because at the end of the day, Israel's not going to listen to Labour calling for a ceasefire.
Well, that's absolutely correct. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to be influenced, is he, in any way, shape or form to call for a ceasefire if Labour MPs decide that's what should happen. But this does matter very, very much to the Labour Party because, of course, Keir Starmer has transformed the party, really, in a very short space of time from one led by Jeremy Corbyn, a man who's described terrorist groups Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends, where there was a huge issue with anti-Semitism. Keir Starmer appears to have transformed the party, appeared to have united it, an astonishing feat really, but ever since October the 7th with those horrific attacks, divisions have been emerging, and as the death toll rises and rises in Gaza, now to over 10,000 reportedly, the divisions are getting clearer and clearer. So, yes, the official position from Sir Keir Starmer is that Labour supports a humanitarian pause. That's the same position as the British government, the same position as the United States. But many, many Labour MPs, about a third of Labour MPs and about 17 shadow front benchers have openly come out in defiance of that position, calling for a ceasefire. And it's quite likely that next week there might be a vote in the Houses of Parliament because the SNP are trying to ensure that there is. And at that point, we will really see how many MPs, Labour MPs, are prepared to nail their colours to the mast with this. Now, Sir Keir Starmer was here in Wolverhampton just a little earlier talking to local people, to students, talking to broadcasters. He was asked about this and really he battered it away. He said he's not going to get into hypotheticals about votes that might not happen, but if and when this vote does happen, I suspect it will happen, what will he do? Because at the moment he's allowed MPs largely to say they want to support a ceasefire if that's how they feel. But will he allow that on a vote? Will he allow a free vote? If he does, he's going to be accused of being weak. But if he doesn't, I think that would be potentially even more dangerous because you could then be looking at a string of resignations. So very, very difficult for the Labour leader. Obviously, problems within the Conservative Party over Israel-Gaza, but I think even more serious for the Labour Party.
And particularly serious because potentially this reveals how Sir Keir Starmer's modernisation project, his mission to show that the Labour Party has changed, might only be surface deep. If he's changed how the leadership speak, but so many of his MPs still take their line from Jeremy Corbyn on Gaza rather than Sir Keir Starmer, perhaps it shows that this modernisation, this moderation project was merely a mirage. Catherine Forster, thank you so much for speaking to us. We'll be back with you later in the programme.
Stay with us here on GB News Live. We'll be hearing from Tel Aviv. The UN Commissioner for Human Rights has accused both Hamas and Israel of war crimes. We'll be delving into that. Do stay with us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Well, just ahead of Remembrance Weekend, let's talk about young war veterans, because the risk of suicide in veterans aged under 25 is up to 4 times higher than the general population. And 11 of those who served in recent military operations are likely to report alcohol problems.
Well, the Forcer Protocol, beg your pardon, is a new initiative aimed at improving police protocol when a veteran goes missing.
Patron, actor and broadcaster Ross Kemp is supporting Claire Lilly. Now, Claire lost her veteran husband to suicide after he went missing.
My former husband was a veteran, a PTSD war veteran, and he sadly took his own life in the lockdown of 2020. There are various measures that can be put into place to prevent suicides, particularly within the veteran sector, from happening. My key message would be that due to the fragmented nature of the veteran welfare landscape, it's imperative that there's a multi-sector approach.
Yeah. So the most important thing when anyone goes missing is time and understanding the profile of that person. So the Forcer Protocol is something that Claire has come up with to make sure that the officers that are trying to find someone who's is a veteran or has served in our armed forces, has been part of the armed forces community, that they know that that person is a veteran or has served. And they can have an idea of what medication they may be on, what personal issues they might have right now, whether they're using alcohol, whether they're using drugs, all things that can help the officers help locate that person as fast as possible. But that information isn't going to be held by the police because it's very sensitive information. It's going to be held by a company called Safe and Found online, and that can be accessed through the use of a code by the police only once that person has gone actually missing.
There's a lot out there that can help a veteran: breath work, diet, exercise, all these there's lots of alternative. Talking is a good thing, but not this incessant talking and communication, because that reignites the trauma. So therefore, the services need to pass that information over for them on their behalf, so that they don't have to keep recounting that trauma.
I think there's a big issue. I'm a civilian. I work sometimes with the services. I think there is still a lack of understanding amongst us, the public, as to what a lot of service personnel go through, both male and female. And I think creating a better understanding is one of the major things, particularly at this time of year. It's the only time really that we remember the members of our armed forces, the sacrifices that are making currently and the sacrifices that they've made in the past. But also you've got to bear in mind that we're losing one veteran a week to suicide, and that quite simply is unacceptable. Well, we'd like them to help push the force of protocol, a protocol that helps the police recognise that when someone goes missing and they're a veteran, that they are a veteran, quite simply, and all the complex issues that come with that. Please ask the question. And also, we'd like to see this rolled out nationally. It's only being rolled out presently by Greater Manchester Police. We'd like to see this adopted at a national level.
Personally, with the sector of veterans that actually go missing or contemplate taking their own life, they're often the forgotten tragedy, element of war, because as we said, when the guns go silent, the battle begins.
I think there is still a massive issue with post-traumatic stress disorder. It can manifest itself at any point after service or even during it. I think there's still a lot to be done to start understanding that and the impact it not only has on that individual, but the family members around that. And I think, I would urge people to buy a poppy or to support a military charity if the Royal British Legion isn't the one that you choose, particularly at this time, because this is a time, we only do it for 2 weeks in the whole year, when we remember the sacrifices of others that have allowed us to have the liberty and live in the democracy that we do.
Listen to Ross Kemp. Got some good advice there.
Certainly.
Really, really interesting to hear from Ross and Claire. Now, as the Israeli military claims to have captured a Hamas stronghold after a bitter 10-hour battle, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights has claimed that both Israel and Hamas have committed war crimes since the conflict began.
Meanwhile, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, has called for a humanitarian pause in fighting, which follows the Israeli military's decision to reopen an evacuation road that allows civilians to move from northern Gaza to the south after the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza was closed today.
Let's hear from a voice on the ground now, and that is Israeli journalist Yotam Confino, who, I believe, Yotam, you are in Tel Aviv this afternoon. Hello to you. Bring us up to date then with what is actually happening within Gaza. There are suggestions that the Israeli military is getting closer and closer to Al-Shifa hospital, which is where Hamas is believed to have a command centre.
Absolutely. The Israeli army believes that Hamas has a headquarter of some sort underneath the Al-Shifa hospital. It's basically an underground tunnel network where they're hiding and where they're operating from, but it's not the only hospital that they're using. Israel has pointed to 2 other hospitals where Hamas is also hiding. It's the Indonesian hospital and a hospital funded by Qatar. So it is inevitable that Israel will eventually get to these hospitals because they will have to find every member of Hamas inside Gaza. And this is what we're seeing now. Israel is also issuing all kinds of video documentation showing that rocket launchers are very, very, very close to these hospitals. In fact, only 75 meters from one of the hospitals. And it's doing this because it needs to convince the international system that what it's doing is systematically dismantling Hamas inside Gaza, which has been a top priority from the beginning. But it cannot do that without going to these specific areas, such as the hospital, such as schools and mosques. So this is once again a huge battle for information and to be on the right side of history morally. At least that's what Israel claims.
I suppose this is why it's so important that IDF soldiers are on the ground there rather than just airstrike after airstrike takes place. But I suppose there is still this worry that despite Hamas, hosting clearly so many command centres nestled in that civilian population, in the places that are least likely to be struck from the air. Do we know if there are still civilians in these hospitals, despite the IDF's warnings to move south and move south quickly?
Yes, we know Al-Shifa is still running. It's in dire need of medical supplies. It says it's overcrowded. It's almost 2 patients per bed. It got some very much needed medical supplies yesterday. So that hospital is still operating. Roughly half of the hospitals in Gaza are not working anymore due to a lack of food, fuel, and in general, just because they are not working anymore. So Israel is trying now to get closer to these areas. But again, as long as Hamas is in there, this is a highly, highly sensitive and dangerous area for civilians to be in. Now, Israel can say that it wants civilians to move south, which a lot of them have been doing, but there are also many that are sick and that cannot physically move. So that is a huge dilemma. And I think very few people know how Israel can actually solve this problem without physically going in to the hospital and to help evacuate them. But if they do, and Hamas are in fact in there, that is going to be an absolute nightmare, both for the Israeli soldiers, for the civilians, and of course also for Hamas.
And what makes it so difficult for civilians, Yotam, is that they're penned in. They're not allowed through the Rafah crossing to find, shelter that is safer, because it appears that nowhere in Gaza, even in the south, is safe.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that we've overlooked and maybe neglected too much in our coverage of this war. We talk a lot about the Israeli siege, which is absolutely true. There is a huge siege on Gaza, on all of the Israeli border crossings. But Egypt is a key player here. And Egypt is a close ally of the Palestinians. So if Egypt had an interest in helping these people, it would allow not just a few hundred wounded Palestinians to go into Sinai. Anyone who's looked at the map and seen Sinai is huge. And all countries in the world are lining up to help with aid to set up field hospitals. So it's not as if they are lacking help at all. It's simply a matter of not allowing the Palestinians to cross into Sinai, because Egypt does not want to be seen as complicit in transferring people from Gaza into Egypt and allowing Israel to take over this area. But it's a huge problem, because Egypt is really, really also failing in many ways to help the Palestinians here.
It's an absolutely fascinating dynamic between all of the power players in this area, but perhaps it could be viewed as a little, perhaps more than callous, that the Egyptian government just keeps that crossing shut and keeps people penned in. Perhaps that's not spoken about enough. But Yotam Confino, thank you so much for talking us through those thorny issues on the ground there in Israel.
Well, do stay with us. We're going to be talking about the damage to the cenotaph in Rochdale. We were bringing you that yesterday. Well, there is an update. We'll be telling you what that is very shortly. First, let's get your headlines with Tatiana.
Thank you and good afternoon. It's 2:33. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Downing Street says the Prime Minister did not clear Suella Braverman's article accusing the police of playing favourites with pro-Palestinian protesters. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Number 10 says Rishi Sunak still has full confidence in the Home Secretary. Liberal Democrats leader Sarah Davey is calling for the Prime Minister to sack her over her claims. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. The Labour leaders called Braverman out of control.
Across the country, I think we see people who are reasonable, who are moderate, and who would always want to support the police in making difficult decisions in difficult circumstances. And that's what you get with an incoming Labour government if we're privileged to come in to serve. What you've got at the moment is the complete opposite. A Home Secretary who is divisive, who is stoking up tension at the very time that we should be trying to reduce tension, and is undermining the police.
Arrests have been made after the cenotaph in Rochdale was sprayed with Free Palestine graffiti across its base. Greater Manchester Police said poppies were removed from the war memorial on Tuesday afternoon. 2 male teenagers are being questioned by police. A group of protesters have scaled Scottish Parliament to hang a banner and Palestinian flag. The group of 5 climbed up the outside of the main entrance, draping the banner, which reads, "Stop arming Israel." Police have cordoned off the area underneath, but business in Parliament is continuing. Police said they're aware of the protest and officers are in attendance. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, we began this hour, as we've begun every hour of this programme, with the astonishing news that Number 10 is currently reviewing, investigating what happened last night between the Prime Minister's office and the Home Secretary. There has been some speculation that the Home Secretary's future may be hanging in the balance, hanging over that decision that is being taken place in number 10 as we speak. But GB viewers have been getting in touch to share their views on this entire situation. Roger says, perhaps Keir Starmer could explain what is not extreme when a bunch of people like marching about in our capital city, shouting jihad and threatening and insulting chants to our Jewish community.
Richard says, GB News must get behind Suella Braverman. You will find 90% of your viewers back her.
And Judy says, Suella is our Prime Minister. That's a bit of a surprise. Get rid of wishy-washy Rishi. That's difficult to say. Suella hits hard and means it. That is the view from Judy.
Yeah, she hits hard, but, you know, I think there are some people that say she has to watch her language and her rhetoric, and she can whip people up. And I can see I got slammed earlier by questioning her language when she talked about poppy sellers being mobbed. Now, I saw one photograph of protesters surrounding poppy sellers. I haven't seen a whole ream of them. I haven't spoken to poppy sellers that have told me that they felt intimidated. But if you see it enough on the front pages, you can see why people would think, oh, well, I better be careful. I won't go out and sell poppies this weekend. When you keep talking about hate marches, you can also see why people might think that's what it is. But it's not necessarily factually correct. And I think facts are so important, and language is important.
Well, it would be fascinating to know what the alleged changes to the article were that number 10 allegedly wanted,
which
but then
bits,
allegedly
which
were
bits
not
they
made.
highlighted in yellow.
Which bits did number 10 want taken out, which were then actually printed? And we don't know any of this. We don't know any of this detail. But, of course, that is ongoing throughout the afternoon, and we'll bring you any updates as and when we get them.
But let's tell you about Greater Manchester Police arresting 2 men in connection with damage to the cenotaph in Rochdale. We were showing you pictures of that yesterday.
Now, the 2 teenagers were arrested on suspicion of causing racially aggravated criminal damage and remain in police custody at the time for questioning.
Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is in Rochdale for us now. So, good afternoon to you, Sophie. Bring us right up to date then with what's happened with this investigation.
Good afternoon to you both. Well, we know that on Tuesday evening, the cenotaph here in Rochdale behind me was graffitied. On one side, the sign behind me here, there was a large blob of green paint daubed onto the side, and on the back half, there were the words "Free Palestine" sprayed in large black letters. Well, as you say, we do now know that 2 male teenagers have been arrested, as you say, on suspicion of causing racially aggravated criminal damage, and they do remain in the custody of Greater Manchester Police for further questioning. In response to this, the Detective Chief Inspector Stuart Round has said the cenotaph means a lot to the community in Rochdale, and the recent incidents have been deeply upsetting, particularly at a time when we should be honouring the memory of war veterans. Now, the words that recent incidents, they use that because this isn't the first incident here in Rochdale. We also know that on Monday, 2 teenagers were arrested due to a separate incident. And over the weekend, there was a video circulating on social media which showed Palestinian flags had been laid on the front of the cenotaph, and that the poppy wreaths had been discarded in front of the cenotaph. Now, I'm not sure if you can see over my shoulder there that the wreaths have been replaced. They are ready to go for Remembrance Weekend, and there are still, I was here yesterday, I was telling you that there were GMP were monitoring and guarding the site. I can see 2 PCSOs over my shoulder here, making sure that this site remains untouched now in the lead up to Remembrance Weekend.
Sophie Reaper in Rochdale, thanks very much.
Well, the Energy Secretary has claimed that Labour is against British oil and gas jobs and wants to increase our reliance on imports from foreign regimes. That's a quote from Claire Coutinho.
And real pay, well, that's not grown for 17 years, according to economists at PwC, which predicts that living standards in Britain will remain low for years to come. 2 slightly different topics there. But let's talk to Liam Halligan about it, our economics and business editor with On the Money. Let's just talk about the energy security issue. Claire Coutinho, does she have a point?
I think she does, actually. I mean, lots of economic news around at the moment. Get used to it. It's going to be like this all the way to the general election. So we're going to need lots of economics and business coverage on GB News, aren't we, Tom?
Well, as Bill Clinton once said, it's the economy's stupid.
It wasn't Bill Clinton, it was his chief economic advisor, James Carville, and it's absolutely true. In the end, it's pocketbook issues, as the Americans say, that determine elections. Do you feel wealthier, the pound or the dollar in your pocket? Claire Coutinho, relatively new energy secretary, close ally of Rishi Sunak, somebody very much aligned with the kind of environmental wing of the Conservative Party, but she's learning fast in the job, if you know what I mean, as politicians often do. Look, Rishi Sunak sees the North Sea as a very important wedge issue, putting clear blue water between his party and Labour, because Keir Starmer, of course, has said that he won't allow any new oil and gas licences if Labour take office. There are currently around 300 drilling licences, but around half of them expire by 2030. We still get 75% of our energy in this country from oil and gas. You can't just rub that out, you know. So what Rishi Sunak has done, a few weeks ago, you'll remember, Pip, he said, we're going to issue some new licences, and they've done that. How many of them will actually be taken up when there's a 75% windfall tax on profits? We'll wait and see. But now Sunak's doubling down on that, and pretty much the only major economic proposal in the King's speech, you know, nothing on pensions, nothing on social care, nothing really to trouble the scorers when it comes to the economy. But he did do North Sea oil and gas. He said he's going to make the renewal of North Sea gas licences, or the bidding process, he's going to make it annual. It's going to be bolted into the calendar. At the moment, it's quite random. They might have one, they might not. So he's not only going to allow more North Sea oil and gas licences, he's going to increase the opportunities for them to be extended. And Labour say, oh, but you haven't done anything on bills. No, they haven't done anything on bills. But the idea is, if we can drill more of our own North Sea oil and gas, then unit energy prices in the UK should come down. That's the idea.
And Liam, this matters because I suppose the government is looking at the areas of the economy where we can get productivity, jobs, growth, frankly, tax revenue as well, because you've got some statistics about the high streets that perhaps aren't so rosy.
No, sure. We'll come on to the high street in a minute. It absolutely matters. Look, Aberdeen, right, is the oil and gas capital of Europe. Oil and gas is Scotland's biggest industry. So if Keir Starmer needs Scotland to win Downing Street, right? So Sunak is highlighting the fact that he isn't doing much for the oil and gas industry. And indeed, the GMB, the third biggest union, a very powerful union under Gary Smith, very canny operator, they're saying that they want these new drilling licences because they have thousands of workers, tens of thousands, in fact, who work across the oil and gas industry. But you're right, Tom, just broadening this out. Here are some figures on the UK high street which don't make great reading. So retail sales were up 2.5% in October compared to October 2022. That sounds OK. But they were up 2.7% in September, so that's a reduction. And the average increase in retail sales across the last 12 months compared to the same month the previous year has been 4.2%. So you can see retail sales are slowing down, and at the same time, inflation is 6.7%. So the increase in retail sales is less than inflation. So as we say, in real terms, post-inflation, retail sales are actually down. Now, this may counter what a lot of GB News viewers and listeners have been hearing, because, oh, M&S are doing really well. And they are. M&S is quite an upmarket store. Their profits are up 56%. Chapeau to them. It's a great British brand. WH Smith is doing quite well. Their annual profits are up 96%. But if you drill down into those WH Smith numbers, their high street stores haven't done particularly well at all. Their retail sales have fallen on the year. It's the travel shops, it's the airport shops, it's the train station shops that are doing really well when it comes to...
Where they charge twice as much.
Where they charge lots, and people are generally, you know, they're a bit better off, or they're going on holiday and they buy themselves a novel and all the rest of it. So, look, it's great WH Smith are doing well, it's great M&S is doing well. We've got to take our good news where we can get it. But the bigger picture on the high street is not great. And the bigger picture on incomes, just to finish off, isn't great either. You cited PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big accounting firms, and they've come up with a study, as you rightly said, Pip. It says that household incomes in the round haven't recovered since 2006. So we are still suffering, not just the long tail of the pandemic, we're still suffering the long tail of the 2008 global financial crisis.
It makes you wonder what Christmas spending will be like. You know, we're seeing all the big cheeses do their Christmas adverts.
We are.
How much money are people going to have to...
I think there will be splurging going on at Christmas, but unfortunately this is the British way, and I've seen it through many economic cycles. People are determined to have a good Christmas for themselves and their families. And indeed, you know, better-heeled shops like M&S will do really well. I'm sure, you know, Sainsbury's and Waitrose will do relatively well. But I think other people will spend money, but they'll end up putting it on tick. It's when the credit card bills hit the mat in January that you really understand the price of a good Christmas. That's particularly the case where still, you know, real wages now, the increases, they are just above the rate of inflation, but these are average real wage increases, and a lot of people, they're not getting the wage rises, and those real wage average increase numbers, they're skewed by the fact that people in the City of London and elsewhere are getting massive pay rises. So it's always worth looking at the details. Some good news, but there's still a lot of pain out there on the high street.
Well, Liam, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest on the general economic picture.
Now, it's been The Guardian versus the Home Office today. A tribunal has been taking place over royal security costs.
Now, The Guardian challenges the government's refusal to tell the public how much taxpayer cash is spent on protecting the King and the royal family. Well, here to tell us more is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Now, this is an unusual case, I suppose, where a newspaper is trying to exact information, but not about politicians, instead about a ceremonial head of state.
Indeed. So the Metropolitan Police is responsible for protecting members of the royal family. And The Guardian put in a Freedom of Information request to the Home Office asking how much of our money, taxpayers' money, was spent on the royal family between the years 2017 to 2020 in terms of protecting them and their security. The Home Office refused that request, and that is why we've ended up in the situation we've got today, where The Guardian is in court trying to get a judge to force the Home Office to release those financial figures. So we're talking about armed bodyguards, these close protection Metropolitan Police officers which are in with each member of the royal family, and the round-the-clock protection of their homes and palaces as well. So James Rutherford, yesterday in court, who provided the witness statement, he works for the Home Office, he said that potential attackers would gain a mosaic of information if the cost of protecting an individual member of the royal family is revealed. He also went on to say that it's a substantial step. Which would increase the risk of an attack, and that valuable new inferences, in other words, an educated guess, would be acquired by a potential attacker as well. Now, in response, Stephen Cragg, KC, representing The Guardian, said that as long as the information is generalised, there's not going to be any increased risk to that particular member of the royal family. And in fact, it's in the public interest to disclose that information so we can have a much more informed discussion about the monarchy and make the institution more accountable. He also went on to suggest, quite interestingly, that the sovereign grant is misleading. Now, the sovereign grant is the pot of money which taxpayers give to the royal family each year to fund things like travel and staff salaries, etc. It was £86 million last year. But that figure does not include the security costs of the royal family. So that's what's being battled out in court at the moment.
Could this set a precedence, then? A precedent?
Well, let's look at the context here. So it's always been a secret how much security is spent on the royal family, but it's also a secret of how much security is spent on the Prime Minister or government ministers or indeed former Prime Ministers. We have 7 living former Prime Ministers at the moment, which clearly has added to the taxpayers' bill, our money. If you compare that to the United States, the President of the United States Secret Service security bill is very, very high, but also it is published in minute detail every year. So that is the difference here. It would be setting a huge precedent if judges at the end of the day say to the Home Office, you have to publish these figures because they have never been published before.
It's very interesting that The Guardian is saying we want these figures to start a conversation about whether or not we have a monarchy, which, I mean, are they suggesting that if we had a president, if we elected President Blair, he wouldn't have any security at all, that he wouldn't have any of the bells and whistles that the royal family have have today?
Well, I think The Guardian's suggesting that the royal family would be more accountable if these figures are published, because at the moment lots of stuff is still shrouded in secrecy. I think that's what The Guardian is getting at here. But on the other hand, even if the monarchy ended tomorrow, these individuals would still require police protection, because clearly we live in a very unsafe world. And even if King Charles was not head of state, he's still a very well-protected public figure who was born into this role. So I don't think it would change anything in terms of the public bill at the end of the year.
Interesting. Well, Cameron, thank you very much for talking us through that story, and indeed thanks to all our contributors today. It's the end of the show. We're back, of course, tomorrow, but up next, it's Martin Daubney.
Hello again, I'm Alex Burkill with your latest GB News weather forecast. Further sunny spells, but also showers through the next day or so. However, it is going to turn drier, albeit chilly into the weekend. At the moment, we have low pressure towards the northwest of the UK, and that is bringing some strong winds, particularly in the southwest, and also quite a showery theme. Plenty of showers as we go through this evening and overnight, especially across western parts. Further east, we're going to have some drier, clearer weather for a time. The heaviest rain in the southwest, and that's where we're going to have the strongest winds too, with gales perhaps even a little bit stronger than that. Where we see clear skies, it is going to turn quite chilly. Some frost is quite likely, particularly across parts of Scotland. So a bit of a chilly start for many of us on Friday morning, and a bit of a wet one too in the south. Outbreaks of rain here, but they will clear away as we go through the morning. Elsewhere, quite a bit of dry and at times sunny weather, though a scattering of showers still likely, particularly in areas exposed to the northerly winds, so northern coasts and some western and in eastern fringes too. Temperatures are going to be a little bit on the low side, highs of around 8 or 9 in the north, getting to around 11 or 12 further south. A cold, frosty start for quite a few of us on Saturday morning, but there will be plenty of sunshine and quite a bit of sunshine as we go through the day as well. A few showers are possible, mainly towards coastal areas, but it should stay largely dry as we go into Sunday. However, some wet and windy weather is going to arrive later. Bye-bye. I'll see you soon.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just